You are watching a BBC News special programme. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, at the age of 99. Prince Philip was by far the longest-serving consort in British history, a role he shaped right from the start. He was 26 when he married the then Princess Elizabeth in 1947. Within 5 years, she would be Queen.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Tributes to the Duke and messages of condolence to the Queen have been sent from leaders around the world, including here in the UK.
We mourn today with Her Majesty the Queen. We offer our condolences to her and to all her family. And we give thanks as a nation and a kingdom for the extraordinary life and work of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
In recent years, there had been signs that Prince Philip's health was declining. He'd been admitted to hospital a number of times throughout the last decade. He recently returned home to Windsor on the 16th of March after a month-long hospital stay. His loss will be felt most keenly by the Queen, his family, and beyond. People have been laying flowers outside the gates of Windsor Castle, where the Duke passed away peacefully this morning. And the flag is flying at half-mast at Buckingham Palace. Well, if you are just joining us, we are broadcasting a special programme following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family joins with people around the world in mourning his loss." Well, we can speak now to our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell, who's outside Buckingham Palace for us. And Sarah, when we spoke a little earlier, you said that people were coming down to Buckingham Palace to express their sadness and lay flowers.
That's right, Rita, and what's interesting is that there's a real mix of ages when you walk amongst the crowd. So there are young people. One girl told me she'd come down because her grandma had wrung her in tears when she heard the news and she wanted her granddaughter to go and lay a tribute or just be here. Other people saying they just wanted to come down to Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace, of course, the London home of the royal family, the building perhaps around the world most associated with Prince Philip and the Queen, so understandable that people would want to come here. There was an announcement posted on the railings of Buckingham Palace, but normally that announcement of the death would have been left up for around 24 hours, but it was taken down within an hour because there is a real concern that while the royal family understand that people will want to mourn and reflect on Prince Philip's life and death, what they don't want to happen is for crowds to gather. So actually at Buckingham Palace there, people are being moved on, so they are laying tributes, they are standing there, but they're not being allowed to stand there for very long. But I guess wanting to come down and remember all the times that they will have seen Prince Philip on the balcony there of Buckingham Palace, thousands of people he would have spoken to in the grounds of Buckingham Palace for one of the garden parties that are held every year, and indeed his very final solo engagement. He did 22,000 solo engagements over a life that was dedicated to service and public duty. That was here in August of 2017. It was a Captain General's parade. He was sort of saying goodbye as Captain General of the Royal Marines. They played for He's a Jolly Good Fellow. He left the forecourt. It was chucking it down with rain, and he had a little sort of tear in the corner of his eye die. And it was a real seminal moment, a very moving moment, because it really was the end of a life of public service. And since then, really, we haven't seen much of Prince Philip in public life. He did retire. He said himself he thought he'd done his bit, which can't be any exaggeration. And so he spent much of the last few years on a cottage at Sandringham until, of course, last March with the pandemic, when he relocated to Windsor Castle and spent really the last year almost solely with the Queen at Windsor Castle in their own sort of little bubble. And so perhaps, hopefully today, it's some comfort to the Queen to know that they did spend 12 months together. It would prove to be the final 12 months of Prince Philip's life, and hopefully that's some comfort. And I'm sure they spent many hours talking and reflecting on what an extraordinary life they've both lived.
Indeed. And Sarah, I know that you've spent some time talking to people who have come to lay flowers. What have people been saying to you?
As I say, I mean, there's a sense of sadness amongst the crowd. Somebody, a young boy, has said that there was a real mix of ages, and it's really interesting. One young lad said, it was an end of an era, that Prince Philip represented sort of an end of a generation, which is quite interesting. I asked another 15-year-old what Prince Philip meant to him, and he said, well, he's just really famous. His mum, who was there, said he'll just be really missed. And then the grandmother said overwhelmingly that we're just thinking about the Queen and the loss that she has suffered. I mean, remember, they were married for 73 years, longer than most of us have been alive. And so thoughts, I'm sure, will be with her, having lost her partner for life, and somebody who she has talked about as being her strength and her stay, and certainly the one who has been the rock throughout her role as Queen, which, you know, is a unique role, potentially a very lonely role, but was made much less so by the constant presence of her husband, Prince Philip.
Sarah, we should say that viewers were just seeing there the sign, the announcement that was put up on the gates announcing the Duke of Edinburgh's death, but that has now been taken down. I think you mentioned earlier, in order to discourage people from staying and reading and being in crowds.
Absolutely right. I mean, we are in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, there are people behind me, some people who, it's the Easter holidays, of course, the schools are off, so people might have been here anyway. But yes, those announcements, sort of any big royal event, important royal national event, will be posted on the railings of Buckingham Palace, and normally it would have stayed there for much longer. But there is a real desire, a real understanding that they don't want to have anything which might attract crowds of people, because it's, you know, it's simply not safe at the moment. And so I think that is going to be a consideration, very much a consideration for the authorities as we go through the next few days, is working out how best such an important life in the history of this country, how Prince Philip's life can be celebrated and mourned, but in a way which, of course, has to respect the restrictions of the pandemic. So, as I say, people are coming today. They were reading the notice, but they were being asked to queue and then to read it and then move on. And now people, when they come and lay flowers, they are being asked to move on.
Sarah, thank you very much. That's our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell, there live outside Buckingham Palace. We can go to Windsor now and to our correspondent Helena Wilkinson. And Helena, Sarah there was talking about thoughts turning to how the Duke of Edinburgh's life can be celebrated and how his passing can be mourned. And in the last hour or so, you've had some details about arrangements for his funeral.
Yes, that's right, Rita. So in the last hour, some detail from the College of Arms about the funeral arrangements. As Sarah touched on there, we are still living under COVID restrictions, so that had to be taken into account when arranging the funeral. But the details we've had so far, and I think we will get more details over the next day or so, is that the Duke of Edinburgh's body will lie in rest here at Windsor Castle ahead of the funeral, which will take place at St George's Chapel, which is just behind us in the grounds of Windsor Castle. The statement goes on to say that this is in line with custom and also with His Royal Highness's wishes. There is also a note about the funeral arrangements having been revised, of course, because of the COVID restrictions, and they also say that they regretfully request that members of the public do not attempt to attend or participate in any of the events that make up the funeral. So some details about the funeral. I think we, of course, can expect more to come perhaps in the next hours or days or so. But here at Windsor Castle, the Royal Standard, which is the flag meaning that the Queen is in residence, is flying at full mast here. That is the only flag that will not be lowered on this occasion. But here in Windsor, a town which has seen over the years many royal events, both happy and sad, today it is one of quiet reflection. And I think you can probably make out, we can just show you some of those flowers that have been left by mainly local people who have come to pay their respects to the Duke of Edinburgh. We spoke to one young boy, and interestingly, Sarah was saying that there were a number of young people who had turned up with family to lay flowers at the palace. Well, similar here as well. One boy, when we asked him why he had come to the castle, he said, "I like the Queen," was his response. And his name was Oscar, and he left a very sweet card with the words, "Your Majesty, so sorry about hearing about your amazing husband." Another local woman who we spoke to, who came again to leave flowers, said, "It's really sad. I just wanted him to get to 100 years old." The Duke of Edinburgh, of course, a couple of months off his 100th birthday. But what we're showing you now is just the way down from the castle itself. Over the past 4 hours or so since the news that the Duke had died, that news rippled through this town. People have been coming over a number of hours, but not in huge numbers. I think people are very well aware, of course, of the COVID restrictions. They've been coming, perhaps spending a bit of time reflecting and leaving flowers here as well. The flowers will no doubt be comfort to the Queen, who over the past year, she and her husband had isolated here at Windsor Castle. They were in a very small bubble with household staff here at the castle. The Duke celebrated his 99th birthday here last year, and they had a very quiet celebration for their 73rd wedding anniversary, spending more time over the past year together as a couple than in previous years. Inside the castle, the Queen, now a widow, life will look very different for her now. And those people who've gathered outside here, Rita, no doubt their thoughts will be with Her Majesty the Queen this evening.
I'm sure that's right. For the time being, thank you very much indeed. That's our correspondent, Helena Wilkinson, there outside Windsor Castle. Well, as we've been hearing, tributes have been paid from around the UK and around the world to Prince Philip, the Queen's husband of 73 years. Richard Galpin reports.
It was shortly before 12:30 this afternoon that the easel with the official announcement that the Duke of Edinburgh had died was carried here to the gates of Buckingham Palace. It said it was with deep sorrow that Her Majesty announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Since then, tributes have been pouring in, including from the country's most senior politicians.
It was with great sadness that a short time ago I received word from Buckingham Palace that His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, has passed away at the age of 99. Prince Philip earned the affection of generations here in the United Kingdom, across the Commonwealth and around the world.
The UK has lost an extraordinary public servant in Prince Philip. He dedicated his life to our country, and above all, I think he'll be remembered for his support and devotion to the Queen. And all of our thoughts are with the Queen, the royal family and the British public as they come together to mourn this huge loss.
Here in Holyrood House in Scotland, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, paid her tribute.
everybody across Scotland, I know, will want to convey first and foremost the condolences that we all feel for the Queen in particular, but for the Duke of Edinburgh's whole family at what is a very, very sad time for them. First and foremost, they are a family, and I think all of our thoughts are with them today.
There were tributes too from the First Ministers of Northern Ireland and Wales.
He had a profound and positive impact on thousands of our young people who found their purpose, passion and place in the world through participation in the Duke of Edinburgh Awards.
On behalf of the Welsh Government and people in all parts of Wales, I offer our deepest condolences to Her Majesty the Queen, Her Majesty's children and their families on this sad occasion.
Besides the politicians, other leading figures in the country have expressed their sadness. In a statement, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said he joined with the rest of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in mourning the loss of the Duke of Edinburgh and gave thanks for his extraordinary life of dedicated service. And here at Aintree Racecourse, flags are at half-mast in tribute to the Duke, who was an honorary member of the Jockey Club. There's also been a 2-minute silence ahead of today's first race in the Grand National Festival. The death of the Duke of Edinburgh has also brought tributes from around the world. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said his thoughts were with the British people and the royal family on the passing away of the Duke of Edinburgh. He had a distinguished career in the military and was at the forefront of many community service initiatives. May his soul rest in peace. And this from the former US President George W. Bush, who said the Duke had devoted himself to worthy causes and to others. He represented the United Kingdom with dignity and brought boundless strength and support to the sovereign. There can be no doubt the Duke leaves a lasting legacy, his unwavering support for the Queen and his patronage of a large number of charities.
And that look back was by our correspondent Richard Galpin. Well, tributes have been pouring in, of course, from across the world to the Duke of Edinburgh. And we've just had a statement by President Joe Biden and the First Lady Jill Biden on the passing of Prince Philip. And it reads, "On behalf of all the people of the United States, we send our deepest condolences to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the entire royal family and all the people of the United Kingdom on the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Over the course of his 99-year life, he saw our world change dramatically and repeatedly. From his service during World War II to his 73 years alongside the Queen and his entire life in the public eye, Prince Philip gladly dedicated himself to the people of the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and to his family. The impact of his decades of devoted public service is evident in the worthy causes he lifted up as patron, in the environmental efforts he championed, in the members of the armed forces that he supported, in the young people he inspired, and so much more. His legacy will live on not only through his family, but in all the charitable endeavours he shaped. Jill and I are keeping the Queen and Prince Philip's children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren in our hearts during this time." So a very personal and full statement of tribute and remembrance by President Joe Biden and the First Lady Jill Biden. Well, the former Prime Minister Theresa May has also been amongst those speaking in the past few minutes.
Well, I think the whole nation is in mourning at the loss of Prince Philip. And my thoughts and prayers are with Her Majesty the Queen, who has lost the man who was her strength and stay for over 70 years. Prince Philip was a remarkable man, a man of many interests, and he put those interests and his talents to the service, the selfless and committed service of the Queen and the country. I think we have so much to be grateful to him for, probably more than many will ever know. Well, I remember him as somebody who was, of course, that tremendous support for Her Majesty the Queen, but also as a man of many talents. He was an engineer, an inventor, a sportsman. He loved cricket. He had so many different interests. He knew about agriculture. He was incredibly knowledgeable about so many different things. And, of course, a very dry sense of humour. So I will remember him predominantly as somebody who gave that support to Her Majesty, but also had so many interests, among which, of course, was his interest in ensuring that young people were encouraged to aspire, to have their horizons stretched, which, of course, so many millions have seen through the Duke of Edinburgh's awards. I remember one occasion particularly, which actually took place at an event locally where I happened to be sitting next to him a few years ago, and he was talking to me about climate change. And he, of course, is somebody who'd been in many ways ahead of his time in thinking about the issue of climate change and the environment and caring about that. But he was also incredibly knowledgeable. So it was always fascinating to listen to him and to hear him expressing not just views, but his knowledge of these various subjects. I thought he was easy to speak to because he had so many different interests and was so knowledgeable on all of them. But also he did have a very dry sense of humour. You had to understand that he had a dry sense of humour. But he always he wanted to put people at their ease. I think that was important to him. I think he recognised that when the Queen, when they both, or when he visited groups of people, they were obviously perhaps a little bit apprehensive at meeting him or at meeting the Queen, but wanted to put people at their ease.
The former Prime Minister Theresa May. Well, our Deputy Political Editor Vicky Young is at Downing Street for us. And Vicky, MPs will themselves be marking Prince Philip's death in the coming days.
Yeah, that's right. Parliament at the moment is on its Easter recess, so they're not around, but they will be recalled, the House of Commons, on Monday, and at 2:30 tributes to Prince Philip will be led by the Prime Minister, and of course all sorts of former Prime Ministers, as we heard there, but other ministers and MPs who will have come across the Duke over the years. I'm sure we'll have plenty of tributes and also anecdotes as well. That's certainly what happened when the Commons paid tribute to Prince Philip on his 90th birthday. So that is due to happen on Monday. Now, we know that the Prime Minister, after he heard the news when he was working here this morning, he spoke to Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, and they've agreed to suspend campaigning for all those elections going on across the United Kingdom. Now, we don't know how long that suspension will go on for, but really normal politics will be paused. There's, according to the government website, a national mourning of 8 days, and I think during that time we will not be getting the normal government announcements that you might expect from ministers. They will, of course, still be telling the public about anything to do with public health, and particularly, of course, the coronavirus pandemic. So we can expect that to be happening, but not all of the other announcements that you might normally expect to happen. Now, there will be meetings too, sort of operational meetings, really. And what's going on behind the scenes now is there will be discussions being really led by the palace. I'm told that that's what happens here. The government really facilitates the wishes of the palace when it comes to things such as funeral arrangements. We won't know the details of that until the decision has been made and it is announced by Buckingham Palace. So all of that to come, but I think most people assuming that if you look back at previous occasions, the death of the Queen Mother, for example, when she laid in state in Westminster Hall, part of the oldest part of the Palace of Westminster, just across the road, that is very, very unlikely to happen. And already there's been some guidance put out by government sort of urging people really not to gather in large groups because of the COVID pandemic outside royal residences, even though, as we've seen from other correspondents around the country, that many people very much want to do that. The government urging caution because we are still in the middle of that pandemic.
Indeed. Thank you so much. That's Vicky Young there, our Deputy Political Editor in Downing Street for us. Well, reaction from around the world to the Duke's death has continued since the news was announced. And joining me now is Fabian Picardo, who is the Chief Minister of Gibraltar. Hello there to you, Mr. Picardo. Just wanted to know your thoughts and reflections on this sad day.
Well, of course, our thoughts are immediately with Her Majesty the Queen and with other members of the royal family who have lost not as we have, a member of the hierarchy of our institutions of government, but a loved member of their family. And in Gibraltar, the Prince of Wales, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, was very much loved. He was here often on occasion. He's visited us more than perhaps other members of the royal family have been able to. He brought the Royal Yacht Britannia alongside himself in 1957. He flew in himself, piloting the aircraft that brought him to Gibraltar in 1996. So he has a long track record of knowing Gibraltar and of supporting the people of Gibraltar.
I don't know what your own interactions with the Duke of Edinburgh were like, but give us a sense of the sort of man he was as you found him.
Well, I remember all the times I had the privilege of speaking to him. He was always full of support for the Gibraltarians, full of the recounting of memories of his time in Gibraltar, wishing us well. And it always sticks in my mind that he would always ask me how the convent was. And the convent is the residence of the governor in Gibraltar, where the Duke of Edinburgh would have stayed on each of his occasions in Gibraltar, some of them quite extended. He spent 10 days here at one stage. He opened our Legislative Council back in 1950. So a very strong relationship with Gibraltar that the people of Gibraltar have always wanted to ensure we remember with fondness.
And you're speaking, of course, as the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, but I wondered about sentiment more widely in Gibraltar. How will people be feeling about this news?
Well, this is a moment of mourning across the whole of the British family of nations. I know that I speak for all of the people of the overseas territories, not just Gibraltar, in saying that this, of course, is a moment when we will all want to join in the expressions of sadness to Her Majesty and of joining in the mourning of all of the members of the British family of nations.
OK. Many thanks. That is the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, Fabian Picardo. Thank you so much for your time. Well, I want to take you over to Sandringham now and to our correspondent, Alex Dunlop, who is there for us. And Alex, a quiet scene as we can see, but I wonder what sort of reaction there's been locally to this news.
Well, I think it's a very quiet part of northwest Norfolk. Certainly the reaction I've been getting from local people is sadness, yes, not surprise. But I think above all, a sense of real respect. They called him the Duke here. And I think it's very significant because he was not just the Duke of Edinburgh, but he was also a very important neighbour at Sandringham. What a lot of people may not fully appreciate is that he effectively lived here for much of the last 4 years after stepping down from royal duties in 2017. So certainly he commanded huge loyalty and respect from the hundreds of state workers and people who lived on the state, and even from the wider community. I would say within the last couple of hours since I've been here, about 1 in 3, 1 in 2 people, couples who've been arriving, have been carrying flowers. And what they've been doing is walking from the visitors centre here at Sandringham through a wood to the iconic Norwich gates, where they've been laying bouquets of flowers. And I think there's an expectation that many more people will turn up, because in the last hour or so they've been the estate workers here have been laying down a wood chip pathway to the Norwich gates. And I'd say at the Norwich gates right now there's about 2 dozen, 3 dozen flowers, bouquets of flowers. Sandringham House, just to give you a sense of the geography, is just beyond that wall over there. Now, importantly, this is not a royal residence, it's not a royal estate, it's a private house owned by the Queen. She inherited it from her father in 1952. And Prince Philip didn't live in the house. He actually spent most of his time at a much more informal cottage called Wood Farm, a couple of miles away in a very quiet, secluded part of the estate, 5-bedroom cottage. And since he retired, that then just gave him the chance to wind down, take breath, and just enjoy his later years. He'd be spent his time painting, shooting, talking to friends, entertaining and reading, and that is what he enjoyed about his latter years here. Sadly, he passed away, as I say, at Windsor Castle. He wasn't able to be here for the last few weeks of his life because he had effectively bubbled with the Queen in Windsor. But certainly this part of the world will miss him very, very much indeed.
Thank you so much. That's Alex Dunlop there at Sandringham for us. Well, Andrew Marr, my colleague, has presented the history of modern Britain, looking at post-war Britain and the Diamond Queen series, as well about the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. And as you can see, he is with me now. Andrew, I don't know if you had time to look at the statement released by President Biden, in which he tried to encapsulate the incredibly long life and the huge history that the Duke of Edinburgh has lived through.
I think this is very much a moment for thinking about perspective in the longer term. Biden's been around for a very long time as well, but when you're looking at the Duke of Edinburgh, you're thinking of somebody who was there to witness the defeat and the surrender of the Japanese imperial forces at the end of the Second World War. You know, I've been reflecting, looking at the pictures. Our royal family, like all royal families around Europe, all the male members at least, have a huge layer of medals on their chests all the time, lots of clanking metalwork on every roll you can think of. This is a man who actually earned his in combat. Two very, very decisive and important battles in the Second World War where he was fighting. He was the youngest, I think, first lieutenant in the Royal Navy at one point. A very, very brave, but also he's just that great scale of history, because we as a country have changed so much, haven't we, Reeta, from the hierarchical, almost all white, very imperial connected, rather military, buttoned up country at the end of the Second World War to the country we are today, a very, very different country, a huge span of history. And the Duke of Edinburgh, like the Queen, has been there with us all the way through, observing. You know, here is somebody who knew all the key leaders of the Soviet Union when it was at the height of its power, who has known every single important 20th century European leader since the war, who has seen it all in front of him. And therefore, you reflect, we are losing, as it were, a living part of our collective history. Whatever you think of monarchy, monarchy goes on and on, generation after generation. A presidential system, you get 4 years, or maybe if you're lucky, 8 years, or whatever it is, and then you've gone. Because of the monarchy, he has been at the epicentre of British power since the 1940s. And that is an extraordinary thing. That is partly why I think a lot of people are reflecting this is a more emotional moment, perhaps, than they were expecting.
So, as you say, the country has changed enormously in these 7 or 8 decades. What about Prince Philip's position, the way in which he's perceived? Because he was a moderniser when he was a young man, wasn't he? But for many younger viewers, he will be seen as somebody old.
A big, hierarchical, you know, traditionalist figure. But no, when he arrived, he was a complete outsider. He wasn't British. He was sort of Danish, Russian, a little bit Greek, a little bit German. I think his, if I can remember it, his original surname was Sonderburg, Glucksburg, Schleswig-Holstein. Then became Battenberg and then Mountbatten and then Windsor. So he's, you know, he was an outsider. He was part of that extraordinary vast web of post-Queen Victoria royals all over the European continent. But his father was an exile, very nearly got himself put up against a wall and shot after an unsuccessful war. He arrives as an exile. His family break into all sorts of different parts. And he comes to fall in love with the Queen, and it was a love match from when they were teenagers, as an outsider. He arrives in a very, very authoritarian, prickly, old-fashioned British monarchy. They don't like him much, he doesn't like them much, and he spends a lot of time pressing against the pressures of the royal family, trying to get them to open up more, trying to get some of the more obscure and extreme aspects of hierarchy and court protocol removed. He environmentalises and greens the monarchy very, very early on. But he had to make his own role. There was no set job. When he asked around, he said, so what is the job of the consort? Nobody knew. There had not been a consort since Albert, really. And that was in Victorian times. And he modelled himself on Albert. Another outsider, Albert, was a German, of course, who comes in and tries to modernise Queen Victoria's England, the Victorian monarchy, in a very different age, a very different way. And in a sense, I think the Duke of Edinburgh modelled himself on Albert and had, in many ways, as much success. They're a very, very ambiguous person, a very complicated man, much more sensitive and rather soulful, I think, behind this great prickly defence. Not the difficult, rebarbative man, always dropping clangers, always saying offensive things that some people think about. More interesting than that.
A difficult role for an independent-minded, strong-willed person, because he had to play second fiddle to the Queen all the time.
He was always 2 steps behind, you know, like an Indian bride, as they say. He was always standing behind. He was a very, very impatient, energetic, intellectually curious man, constantly challenging people and things. I think it must be a very, very boring life to be a member of the royal family, frankly. Rita. I think, you know, once you've seen 200 or 300 military parades, you've probably had enough of them. Endless standing around waiting for other people to make speeches, endless observing things. And I think some of his remarks and his comments come from somebody who just got bored a lot of the time and wanted to ask questions, wanted to provoke, wanted to jab people in the chest and get the response. That made him difficult as far as the press was concerned, because they were expecting, as it were, a completely predictable figure who would just say the kind of things you expect a member of the royal family to say. And he was never like that. He was always surprising, as I found out to my cost occasionally.
Tell us more.
No, I've already explained. I was involved in a conversation about Charles Darwin, and I was, like many people when they first meet somebody like the Duke of Edinburgh, or indeed the Queen, slightly, perhaps more than slightly nervous, and probably babbling on in an inconsequential way. And he wanted to know how important I thought Darwin was in the world of Victorian Britain. And I think Darwin was the single most important Victorian. I think he did more to reshape collective humanity's view of the world than anybody else in his time, and therefore was really more important than any of the prime ministers or generals or anything else. And I sort of explained that in a burbling way, and he paused. It was a pregnant pause, and he stared at me and he said, "I intensely dislike generalizations." And I felt absolutely crushed, because, you know, he would always come back with something sharp and to the point. He was never somebody who enjoyed euphemism or smoothing over language.
We heard exactly the same from Lord Brown, who had dealings with him, that he liked to be absolutely to the point. We should just reflect, before you go, Andrew, on the fact that the Queen, who has had a 73-year marriage to the Duke of Edinburgh, now finds herself a widow.
It must be a very, very difficult day for her, and the next few weeks and months are going to be pretty horrible too. She always relied on him, whether he was at her side physically or whether he was at the other end of a telephone. She always wanted to know what he thought about important matters in terms of things inside the royal family, and there's plenty to discuss there, always. I mean, he was her sounding board. He came forward with his own ideas the whole time. They didn't always agree, I'm sure, but he was always there for her. He was a huge emotional support all the way through, but also an intellectual sounding board, and that has suddenly gone, and there's no doubt that life will be bleaker for the Queen from now on.
OK. Andrew, many thanks. Andrew Marr there. Well, in public, when appearing with the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh always fulfilled the duties of royal consort, taking second place to Her Majesty. But as our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell reports now, behind closed doors, the Duke exercised immense influence on the life of the royal family and drove many of its key decisions and reforms.
Great roar from the crowd outside Buckingham Palace.
While the Queen took centre stage in public life, when it came to family matters, it was Prince Philip who was in charge. When Elizabeth came to the throne, Philip had to leave the Navy. It was unusual in the 1950s and 60s for the man of the household to give up his career to support his wife and children. But he had little choice but to fit his life around her unique position. And, as their home movies show, he did so with gusto.
First-hand accounts that I've been told by people who were there at the time of Prince Philip not just bathing the children, playing with the children, but reading to the children. He was a hands-on dad.
His was an unusual childhood, split up from his parents and his 4 sisters, one of whom was tragically killed.
The pleasures of family life are enjoyed by the baby's mother and father less frequently than by ordinary parents.
Royal duties involved frequent foreign travel, but as Philip's family grew, he was determined to do things differently.
I always aim to be home during the holidays anyway, so that I can see the children. I mean, we try and keep the children out of the public eye, largely so that they can grow up as normally as possible.
What's this for?
In 1969,
What's this for?
Philip allowed the TV cameras in for a behind-the-scenes documentary. This was the royal family, as never seen before or since, reportedly on the instruction of the Queen. Decisions such as schooling were his. Gordonston, the Scottish boarding school, had suited Philip as a youngster, and so that's where he chose to send his sons. While in later life, Prince Charles praised the school's ethos, his years there, far from home, were difficult.
Prince Charles has his memories, and that when it comes to Prince Philip's motives
in what he was doing as a father. It was to try to toughen up his son, to correct what he perceived as weaknesses. I suppose ultimately perhaps to recreate the self-reliant, self-confident boy that Philip was turned into by the Gordonston system.
Father and son did come to share common ground, however. The Duke passed on his love of painting and a passion for the environment and conservation. His relationship with his other children was more straightforward. The bond with Princess Anne was clear. Alike in many ways, she was outspoken and she knew how to deal with her father's similarly frank manner. He shared a naval background with Prince Andrew, both having served in fields of conflict. And he may have been disappointed when Prince Edward chose to leave the Royal Marines, but over the years their relationship grew ever closer. It was to his youngest son that Philip entrusted perhaps his greatest legacy, the Duke of Edinburgh's award.
What's it like working with your father?
He doesn't, don't worry.
It's very easy.
He does his own thing.
And now the veil is thrown back and we can see the Princess of Wales.
There were difficult years when the marriages of 3 of his 4 children failed, the most public, the split of Charles and Diana. What emerged much later, to the surprise of some, was the extent to which he tried to help. During the breakup, he'd written to his daughter-in-law, and the tone of his letters and her replies revealed a softer, compassionate side to the Duke rarely seen in public. Dearest Pa, she wrote in 1992, that she was pleased to receive his letter, and particularly so to read that he was desperately anxious to help. He replied, if invited, he would always do his utmost to help, but was quite ready to concede that he had no talents as a marriage counsellor.
There was no doubt on her part that gruff and stern though Philip could often be, that his motives were of the best, and she appreciated that.
Into his 90s, public engagements became fewer, but family events, like Princess Charlotte's christening, remained a priority. In 2018, despite a recent hip replacement, he walked unaided into the chapel for his grandson Harry's wedding. 2 years later, isolating at Windsor, he was there for his granddaughter Beatrice.
A heavy programme of official engagements prevents the Princess and the Duke from seeing their son as often as they wish. It is only on occasions like this that they can enjoy the happiness of parenthood.
It was a long life, where duty and family responsibility often came into conflict. The pandemic, as has been the case for so many families, deprived his loved ones of direct contact with him in his final months. His diminishing influence as the family patriarch coincided with a time of great public and private upset for the family. Perhaps the Duke's steadying influence and forthright manner were missed. His children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be united in mourning his loss.
By his own admission, Prince Philip's years in the Royal Navy were immensely important in forming his character, and throughout his life he maintained the outlook and the bearing of a naval officer. As a midshipman, he was mentioned in dispatches for his bravery under fire. And later, when royal duties replaced his naval career, he worked to keep Britain's maritime history alive. We can look back now at the Duke's close relationship with the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy and life at sea were a huge part of the Duke of Edinburgh's career. It had been a British destroyer that had taken him, as a toddler, into exile from his native Greece. 2 of his sons were naval officers, Prince Charles and Prince Andrew, taking up where he'd left off after his wife became Queen. Prince Philip joined the Navy straight from school. As a cadet, he first met Princess Elizabeth in 1939, when she visited Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth with her parents. Active service came during World War II in 1940, as a midshipman on the old battleship HMS Ramillies. Years later, he reflected on life as a sailor.
You're exposed to the elements
in a way which you're not ashore in any time, because you've got your feet on the earth, as it were, and you've got some sort of security of shelter and so on. Whereas at sea, you're in a cockle shell in this enormous expanse of the ocean, so that tends to cut you down to size a bit.
In 1941, Philip joined HMS Valiant, operating in some danger in the Mediterranean. During the Battle of Cape Matapan, he earned a mention in dispatches for directing searchlights onto enemy cruisers.
We were hit by 2 bombs. The whole ship bent like that with the explosions, and actually bent sufficiently for some of the hatches down below to be jammed. So several people rang up and said, please, can you get a tin opener? We'd like to get out.
Promotion followed and a posting to a destroyer on hazardous convoy duty in the North Sea, before he returned to the Mediterranean in support of the Allied invasion of Sicily. At the end of the war, he was in Tokyo Bay to witness the surrender of Japanese forces. After his marriage, he studied at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich and was posted to Malta, where Princess Elizabeth joined him as an officer's wife. It was clearly a happy time for them both. In 1950, Philip was given his first command, the frigate HMS Magpie. But his active naval career ended 2 years later when the Queen succeeded to the throne. He accepted this momentous change in his life and simply got on with the job. But his contemporaries always believed that he could have achieved high rank.
I remember Lord Mountbatten talking to me when I was First Sea Lord, and he said, of course, if Philip had stayed in the Navy, there would have been great competition between you. I don't think the competition would have been very strong, actually. He would have got it.
Do you think so?
Oh, yes.
Royal duties were now his first priority. But the Duke maintained his interest in Britain's maritime heritage. And on the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, he was quick to leave the royal podium to march alongside his old comrades. A look back there at the lasting importance of the Royal Navy for the Duke of Edinburgh. Well, the Queen is the patron of the Royal Commonwealth Society, and in a statement this afternoon, they paid tribute to the Duke. Through his extensive support for charities and organisations across the Commonwealth family, as well as his countless visits with the Queen and individually to Commonwealth countries, the Duke of Edinburgh championed and celebrated the wonderful diversity and many achievements of the Commonwealth's 2.4 billion people. We can speak now to Linda Yu, who's the chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society. Hello there, Linda. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a fact well known, the dedication that the Queen feels towards the Commonwealth, but this was shared by the Duke of Edinburgh.
Very much so. The Duke accompanied the Queen on all of her 251 overseas visits, and about a third of those were to Commonwealth countries. So the two of them had traveled and visited every Commonwealth country except for 2, Cameroon and Rwanda, which is a late entrant. And looking at the Duke's patronages, the kind of charities that he supported over 800 charities, but about 260 of those, about a third, were also in the Commonwealth. So I think that gives a sense of the importance of the Commonwealth in his charitable work, and certainly his presence, and why we say he will make a lasting impact on the Commonwealth.
Did you, in your role as chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society, have much to do with the Duke? And if you did, what were your interactions with him like?
I had the privilege of meeting him when he accompanied the Queen on a couple of events in 2016. So this is the year before he stopped doing formal duties, as it were. And he was always very engaged, very interested in finding out what our current projects were. I've also seen him interacting with Commonwealth diplomats as well as with charitable figures. And in fact, the last engagement that I interacted with him at was at Buckingham Palace for the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy, which is the first environmental project in the Queen's name. And this is to get all 54 Commonwealth countries to commit to protecting greenery for the future. And this environmental interest is, of course, very high in terms of the Duke's own work. He was, after all, the first UK president, the first president, I should say, the WWF, UK. And so throughout these interactions, he was, and you can imagine with all the people they meet, he was always very interested in the details and in asking me about how I was finding doing volunteering and charity work for the Commonwealth.
So that, in a sense, brought together two of the Duke's passions, the Commonwealth and the environment.
It did. And I would also say another notable contribution that he made among many to the Commonwealth is through the Commonwealth Study Conferences. So he brings together about 300 young emerging leaders. So you also see this other thing coming through of youth and community. And they meet every 6 years in a Commonwealth country. The next meeting is due to be held in Canada in 2023, where they undertake a study tour. So you bring people from the charitable sector, from industry, from government, and what he wants to do is for them to do community service, to network beyond their usual groupings, and to do that, to develop their leadership skills. And I think that's going to make another lasting impact, this real sense that what makes the Commonwealth quite different is that it's the people-to-people interactions amongst 2.4 billion people. So it's not just the governments, but it's the community, the young leaders sharing their work in areas like the environment, like building connections to help their community. So I think that came through very strongly in all of the Duke's work. And certainly when I think back to the last trip that he took with the Queen to a Commonwealth country, which was Malta in 2015 for the heads of government meeting, the Queen said that she was indebted to the Duke for all of the work that he's done for the Commonwealth, much of which perhaps doesn't get mentioned as much as her work.
It's a very interesting picture that you paint, because some people may have seen the Duke of Edinburgh as being a fairly formidable character, a forbidding character even, and no doubt he could be that on occasion, but clearly behind the scenes there was a great deal of very hard and very worthwhile work that was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. My encounter with him is that he was extremely engaged in my describing what our work was with young people, with in terms of the environment, in terms of building community. And in fact, one of his other main charitable legacies is the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. And that's also present in about 41 Commonwealth countries. So you can see his sort of very long-standing, I think, commitment to getting people out to do volunteering, to do service. It probably does help that he was, quite a figure. So if he were to hand you an award and say, well done, it does mean quite a lot. In fact, one of my staff got the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And then 2 years later, she started working for the Royal Commonwealth Society and was interacting with the royal family, doing an event at St. James's. So he certainly changed her life. She could have done anything. And she's still with us, working in the charitable sector for the Commonwealth.
That's a very nice story. Thank you so much. That's Linda Yu there, the chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society. Thank you for sharing your memories. Well, tributes have been pouring in to the Duke of Edinburgh, and in the past few minutes, Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, has paid this tribute to the Duke.
My first reaction was to think of Her Majesty the Queen and to feel a deep sense of sympathy and compassion for her and for the whole family at the loss of such a gigantic figure, particularly in her own life, married for well over 70 years, 73 years. I think I heard today that there's only 5% of the population who were alive, who have been alive longer than the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh had known each other. So that was my first thought. I think, secondly, to feel an extraordinary sense of what a remarkable life. What a wonderful life of service, of duty, of service to his country, service to the crown, but with this formidable intelligence, insight, and a really extraordinary prophetic gift.
You've met him in your role as Archbishop. What impression did you have of him from those meetings?
Well, I think, as I say, the impression that comes across most clearly is of a man of profound intelligence. Very practical, extremely down to earth. But the moment you were into a conversation with him, you began to realize how widely he'd read, how deeply he thought, and in particular in conversations I had with him, how deeply he thought about issues of theology. But also the distinctive thing, which I think has been coming out in a number of things people have been saying today, is he had an almost prophetic gift of being not just a few years ahead of the curve, but in so many areas, whole decades ahead, a quarter of a century, half a century ahead, on issues like conservation, issues like climate change, interfaith dialogue, motivation for young people. I mean, he was talking about it when he was being laughed at for it. And half a century later, people are saying, oh, it's really important. Don't know why nobody thought of it before. He thought of it before.
You mentioned interfaith relations. He was a man of faith as well.
He was a man of very profound faith. I preached in front of him on more than one occasion, and you knew that one of the most interesting bits of preaching when he was present was the questions you'd get from him afterwards, which showed that he paid intense attention. And he would push back and question and examine in a way that wasn't intimidating, but was really had you on your toes. This was a man who thought profoundly about his faith, and it was a very deep faith, a very solid faith. And when we talk about interfaith, he would communicate superbly with people of other faiths without any compromise to his Christian commitment.
There are a lot of tributes today to his character, and you said in your statement earlier today that he was an outstanding example of Christian service.
Yes. There's a theme that runs through the words of Jesus Christ, which is summed up in something he said. Jesus said, if anyone wants to be my disciple, they must take up their cross and follow me. Prince Philip literally followed the Queen, always a couple of paces behind. That's how it is. That sense of following while bearing, at times I suspect that I don't get this firsthand, but from other things he said, the quite considerable burden of never being the number one is an extraordinary sign of disciplined humility when your talents are that great, combined with just following what was right, and in his faith, following Christ, as he followed the Queen.
You mentioned the longevity of his service. What would you say to those who feel shocked and perhaps a bit unstable as a result of the news today?
I would say it's Easter time. And at Easter, we remember above all the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ was raised by God from the dead. Death is not the end. There is something enormously impressive about a life lived well and ended well. And Prince Philip sums up a life lived well and ended well.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, there with his thoughts about the Duke of Edinburgh, his life and his legacy. Well, if you are just joining us, we are broadcasting a special programme following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss. This is a BBC News special programme following the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, at the age of 99. Prince Philip was by far the longest-serving consort in British history, a role that he shaped from the start.
Try and grow into it, and that was by trial and error. And there was no precedent. But if I asked somebody what you expect me to do, they all looked blank. They had no idea. Nobody had much idea.
He was 26 when he married the then Princess Elizabeth in 1947. Within 5 years, she would be Queen.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Tributes to the Duke and messages of condolence to the Queen have been sent from leaders around the world, including here in the UK.
We mourn today with Her Majesty the Queen. We offer our condolences to her and to all her family. And we give thanks as a nation and a kingdom for the extraordinary life and work of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
In recent years, there'd been signs that Prince Philip's health was declining. He'd been admitted to hospital a number of times throughout the last decade. He recently returned home to Windsor on the 16th of March after a month-long stay in hospital. His loss will be felt most keenly by the Queen, his family, and beyond. People have been laying flowers outside the gates of Windsor Castle, where the Duke passed away peacefully this morning. The flag is flying at half-mast at Buckingham Palace. Prince Philip's funeral will take place at St George's Chapel in Windsor. We'll be reflecting on his extraordinary life of service and of duty. Hello, if you are just joining us, we are broadcasting a special programme following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss." We will have continuing coverage and tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh, but first, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell looks back at his long and eventful life.
First after them, her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who, with his hands between the hands of the Queen, becomes her liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship. In the name
At the Queen's coronation, he was the first person after the bishops to pay homage to her. Philip knelt before his wife and pledged his loyalty.
Faith and truth I will bear unto you, live and die,
And so,
against all manner of
rising, touches the crown upon her head and kisses her upon the left cheek.
As a male consort to a female sovereign, Philip had no constitutional significance. Yet no one was closer to the monarchy or of greater importance to the monarch than he was. By instinct he was a leader, yet Philip had always to take second place. By nature he spoke his mind, and that sometimes got him into trouble. Yet for decade after decade, his was the support that mattered most to the throne. Philip was born in Corfu in 1921. His family was part of European royalty. He was a prince of Greece, but his ancestors were largely Danish, German and Russian. Philip had a rootless childhood. His family was banished from Greece, his parents separated, and he was sent to Gordonston School in northern Scotland. The Spartan atmosphere there suited him. As the Second World War loomed, Philip was an 18-year-old Royal Navy cadet at Dartmouth.
His Majesty walking down the ranks of the cadets.
And when the King and Queen visited the college, they brought with them their 13-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth. According to witnesses, Philip showed off a great deal, but the meeting had made a deep impression on the princess. Philip served in the Royal Navy with distinction during the war. When the fighting ended, he started to escort Elizabeth to family gatherings. He changed his name to Philip Mountbatten and became a British citizen. The public realised there was a romance. Yet within Buckingham Palace, Philip was regarded with suspicion. One courtier wrote privately that he was rough, uneducated, and would probably not be faithful. But Elizabeth was deeply in love, and in the summer of 1947, the palace announced their engagement.
It is with the greatest pleasure that the King and Queen announced the betrothal of their dearly beloved daughter, the Princess Elizabeth, to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, R.N.
On the 20th of November 1947, the newly created Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, stood within Westminster Abbey and exchanged marriage vows with the heir to the British throne.
I, Philip. I, Philip. Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. To my wedded wife. To my wedded wife.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
In 1952, the couple set off on a tour of the Commonwealth. The King came with them to the airport. It was the last time they were to see King George VI, who, unknown to his daughter, was in the final stages of lung cancer.
It was a farewell. It was also, as events turned out, goodbye.
It was at a hunting lodge in Kenya that Philip told his wife of her father's death. Someone who was there said Philip looked as though half the world had dropped on him. They returned to London to lead the national mourning.
And now here is the Queen.
His wife was now Queen. Philip was there in support, but he was never given the title Prince Consort, and his role was undefined. He channeled some of his restless energy into a boisterous social life. He and a group of male friends met every week in rooms above a restaurant in London's Soho. There were long, convivial lunches, visits to nightclubs, and glamorous companions. By the 1960s, Philip's life was more settled. He and the Queen had completed their family with 2 more children, Andrew and Edward, who joined Charles and Anne, and he had found a new role for himself.
Is it the 18th we're due back now?
18th.
From his office in the palace, he promoted issues in which he had a personal interest.
40 minutes to get round the world. Well, it's going to be a bit of a rush. It may leave you a little bit muddled.
Yet diplomacy seemed alien to him. He urged British industry to pull its finger out and complained on American television that the royal family didn't have enough money.
Inevitably, if nothing happens, we shall either have to, I don't know, we may have to move into smaller premises, who knows?
He blundered on a state visit to China with the Queen. He made what he thought was a private remark about slitty eyes. It was a diplomatic gaffe which dominated the headlines and added to his reputation for making misjudged remarks.
It's all right, Snip.
Yet Philip had a sharp, inquiring mind and was determined to make a contribution of his own. The groundbreaking 60s film Royal Family was made largely at his instigation because he felt it was time for the family to show a more human face to the world.
The salad is ready.
Good.
And for many years he toured the globe as president of the then World Wildlife Fund, speaking out about the need to conserve nature.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet just as much as they depend on us.
He promoted technology, helped underprivileged children, and had a lifelong interest in spiritual issues. But his most lasting creation was the scheme named after him, the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which encouraged young people to realise their potential.
To give young people a chance to discover their own abilities for themselves as an introduction to the responsibilities and interests of the grown-up world, and incidentally, to make new friends and have a great deal of fun and satisfaction in the process.
Believe it.
No decade was more difficult for the royal family than the 1990s. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, was both a family tragedy and a moment of tension for the monarchy. It was the Queen to whom the country looked for public comfort. It was Philip to whom the Queen turned for private support.
And still Prince William, with his head hung, walking next to his grandfather.
It was Philip whose gentle encouragement had persuaded William and Harry to walk behind their mother's coffin to her funeral. And, contrary to his sometimes insensitive image, it had been Philip who'd taken the lead in trying to understand the domestic problems of his children, prompted perhaps by his own memories of what it's like to marry into the royal family. Philip remained physically active at an age when most men would have relished retirement. He went carriage driving, and he was still carrying out more engagements than many younger members of the family. Some he did alone, such as this visit to British troops in Iraq.
How did you get into this?
But most he did with his wife. He was the figure a few paces behind the Queen, always looking out for her, and often guiding children through the barriers to present their flowers to her. By the time of his 90th birthday in June 2011, celebrated at his insistence with little fanfare, he'd accepted that it was time to slow down a little.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say. On top of that, memories going. I can't remember names and things. Yes, I'm just sort of winding down.
There was little immediate evidence, though, of any winding down. Despite a serious health scare at Christmas 2011, when he had to be taken to hospital with a blocked coronary artery, he remained at the Queen's side for most of her Diamond Jubilee programme, which took them the length and breadth of the country. It wasn't until 2017 that the Duke, then aged 96, carried out his final solo engagement. It was a parade for the Royal Marines on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. It was pouring with rain, but, as ever, duty took priority. He took his time meeting those on parade and taking the salute as the Marines marched past to bid him farewell. His life after that was much quieter, spent mostly at the Queen's estate at Sandringham. It was there in January 2019, while he was driving himself from the estate, that he survived a serious road accident. His vehicle overturned, he was badly shaken, and he surrendered his driving licence shortly afterwards. By now he was rarely seen in public. There were occasional appearances at family occasions such as weddings, yet he remained a supportive figure to the Queen and his family. The last sight of him was last month, leaving hospital in London after a month-long stay. He'd undergone treatment for an unspecified heart condition, and he looked frail. While he'd been in hospital, the Queen had had to deal with the aftermath of the Sussexes' US television interview without her husband at her side. Throughout his adult life, despite the formality of his position, Philip retained his own style of doing things. He made his own uncompromising mark on national life. He once summed up his approach in characteristically forthright fashion.
I've just done what I think is my best. I can't suddenly change my whole way of doing things. I can't change my interests. I can't change the way in which I react to things. It's part of that's somebody's style, and it's too bad. You've got to lump it.
Throughout all the monarchy's many ups and downs since the Second World War, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the longest-serving consort in British history, was the restless outsider who put his wife and duty first. In doing so, he fulfilled his coronation oath of allegiance to Elizabeth, his Queen. Their marriage and his support were the essential foundations which underpinned the success of her reign. In a speech to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary, the Queen spoke of the debt that she and the country owed him.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell there. Well, let's go over to Windsor now and to our correspondent Helena Wilkinson, who's outside Windsor Castle. And Helena, we have had more details in the last few hours of the sort of funeral that we can expect of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Yes, that's right, Rita. We have had some detail about what we can expect, and given that we still are living under some COVID restrictions at the moment, we know that the funeral arrangements have been revised accordingly, but we know now that the Duke of Edinburgh's body will lie at rest here at Windsor Castle ahead of the funeral, and the funeral itself will take place in St George's Chapel, which is just behind us in the grounds of Windsor Castle. We don't know when it will take place, but those details will no doubt be relayed to us when they have been confirmed. But we are also told that the arrangements that I've just mentioned are in line with custom and also with the Duke of Edinburgh's wishes. So those are the arrangements, the details we have been given so far. But here in Windsor, a town which is used to royal events over the years, many happy ones, many sad ones. Today it is really a moment of sombre reflection, and we can probably just show you some of the flowers that have been laid by mainly local people who have come out wishing to pay their respects to the Duke of Edinburgh. We have had, though, a statement from Buckingham Palace. Given the COVID restrictions, they are asking people to not lay flowers, in other words, not to come and gather and to lay flowers. And during this time, the royal family are asking that members of the public consider making a donation to a charity instead of leaving floral tributes in memory of the Duke of Edinburgh. There is also, if people want to pay their condolences online, the Palace have said that there is an online book of condolence for those wishing to leave messages. That website, www.royal.uk. But some people still arriving here, I think people obviously well aware of the COVID rules, and many people have just turned up to spend some time reflecting on the Duke of Edinburgh's extraordinary life. Some, as I say, leaving flowers, but the Palace now asking people instead if they wish to donate to a charity and not come here to leave flowers. But behind us here, Rita, inside the castle, the Queen here this evening, a widow. She is now in mourning for her husband, who together they spent much of the last year since the virus began to unravel. They spent it with a small household staff here at Windsor Castle. The Duke celebrated his 99th birthday here in Windsor last year, and also they celebrated quietly their wedding anniversary here at the castle. So thoughts here this evening, Rita, from all of those who have come here to pay their respects. Thoughts are with Her Majesty the Queen tonight.
Thank you so much. Our correspondent Helena Wilkinson there outside Windsor Castle for us. As we've been hearing, tributes have been paid from around the UK and the world to Prince Philip, the Queen's husband of 73 years. Richard Galpin reports.
It was shortly before 12:30 this afternoon that the easel with the official announcement that the Duke of Edinburgh had died was carried here to the gates of Buckingham Palace. It said it was with deep sorrow that Her Majesty announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Since then, tributes have been pouring in including from the country's most senior politicians.
It was with great sadness that a short time ago I received word from Buckingham Palace that His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, has passed away at the age of 99. Prince Philip earned the affection of generations here in the United Kingdom, across the Commonwealth and around the world.
The UK has lost an extraordinary public servant in Prince Philip. He dedicated his life to our country, and above all I think he'll be remembered for his support and devotion to the Queen. And all of our thoughts are with the Queen, the royal family and the British public as they come together to mourn this huge loss.
People were talking about Prince Philip's amazing service to our country, what a strong support he was to the Queen, the fact he was a pioneering environmentalist, that he was a war hero, and we all owe him a great debt of gratitude. But I'm actually thinking of his family. I think today the royal family are like any other family, coming to terms with their loss, with their bereavement.
Here in Holyrood House in Scotland, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, paid her tribute.
Everybody across Scotland, I know, will want to convey first and foremost the condolences that we all feel for the Queen in particular, but for the Duke of Edinburgh's whole family at what is a very, very sad time for them. First and foremost, they are a family, and I think all of our thoughts are with them today.
There were tributes too from the First Ministers of Northern Ireland and Wales.
He had a profound and positive impact on thousands of our young people who found their purpose, passion and place in the world through participation in the Duke of Edinburgh Awards.
On behalf of the Welsh Government and people in all parts of Wales, I offer our deepest condolences to Her Majesty the Queen, Her Majesty's children and their families on this sad occasion.
Besides the politicians, other leading figures in the country have expressed their sadness.
What a remarkable life. What a wonderful life of service, of duty, of service to his country, service to the Crown, but with this formidable intelligence, insight, and a really extraordinary prophetic gift.
And here at Aintree Racecourse, flags are at half-mast in tribute to the Duke, who was an honorary member of the Jockey Club. There's also been a 2-minute silence ahead of today's first race in the Grand National Festival. The death of the Duke of Edinburgh has also brought tributes from around the world. The US President Joe Biden said from the Duke's service during World War II to his 73 years alongside the Queen and his entire life in the public eye, Prince Philip gladly dedicated himself to the people of the UK, the Commonwealth, and to his family. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said his thoughts were with the British people and the royal family on the passing away of the Duke of Edinburgh. He had a distinguished career in the military and was at the forefront of many community service initiatives. May his soul rest in peace. There can be no doubt the Duke leaves a lasting legacy, his unwavering support for the Queen and his patronage of a large number of charities.
That was Richard Galpin with tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh being paid from leaders around the world. Well, during that time, we've just had a statement from President Obama, former President Obama, and his wife, Michelle Obama, on the passing of Prince Philip. And he says, they say, when we first met His Royal Highness Prince Philip, he and Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II had already been on the world stage for more than half a century, welcoming leaders like Churchill and Kennedy, Mandela and Gorbachev. As two Americans unaccustomed to palaces and pomp, we didn't know what to expect. We shouldn't have worried. The Queen and Prince Philip immediately put us at ease with their grace and generosity, turning a ceremonial occasion into something far more natural, even comfortable. Prince Philip in particular was kind and warm, with a sharp wit and unfailing good humour. It was our first introduction to the man behind the title, and in the years since, our admiration for him has only grown. We will miss him dearly. They go on, like the Queen, Prince Philip saw world wars and economic crises come and go. The radio gave way to the television and the television to the internet. And through it all, he helped provide steady leadership and guiding wisdom. It's long been said that the US and Great Britain have a special relationship, one that has been maintained and strengthened not just by presidents and prime ministers, but by the royal family that has outlasted them all. They go on, at the Queen's side or trailing the customary 2 steps behind, Prince Philip showed the world what it meant to be a supportive husband to a powerful woman. Yet he also found a way to lead without demanding the spotlight, serving in combat in World War II, commanding a frigate in the Royal Navy and tirelessly touring the world to champion British industry and excellence. Through his extraordinary example, he proved that true partnership has room for both ambition and selflessness, all in service of something greater. And Mr. and Mrs. Obama go on to say, as the world mourns his loss, we send our warmest wishes and deepest sympathies to the Queen, their children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and to everyone who knew and loved this remarkable man. So a very warm and full tribute there from Barack and Michelle Obama. I want to take you now to Downing Street, where our political editor Laura Kunsberg is standing by. And Laura, we hear that MPs will be returning to Westminster to pay their collective tribute to the Duke of Edinburgh sometime soon.
That's right, Rita. MPs are actually technically right now on their Easter break, but no surprise, they are going to be recalled to Parliament on Monday, a day earlier, where there will be a special sitting of the House of Commons where MPs will be led in tribute by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, with the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, responding for the Labour Party too. And one of the very obvious things today has been that despite the fact that our unwritten constitution doesn't give the spouse of the monarch a formal role in things, there's no question in our political leaders' minds of the great influence and importance that Prince Philip has had, not just because of his own decades of individual public service, but that crucial role of providing steadfast support to the monarch over the many decades. And it's astonishing to think also just about the longevity. His lifespan included 20 prime ministers. He was born when Lloyd George was here in Downing Street, and of course has sadly passed away with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. And the fact that normal politics has been put on pause for a while, with election campaigning suspended, normal business not happening for the next little while, is perhaps a reminder of the real contrast between the frenzied pace of politics in the 2020s, but the real lasting permanence of that other huge institution in this country, the monarchy, which has such a special and at times, mystifying relationship between the palace just up the road from here and Downing Street here, a relationship so critical to how this country works.
Laura, for the time being, many thanks. That's our political editor, Laura Kunsberg, there in Downing Street. Well, let's go now to our royal correspondent, Sarah Campbell, who's outside Buckingham Palace for us. And Sarah, we've been speaking to you during the afternoon. You've pointed out that as of necessity, it's been a fairly muted public expression of sadness because of the COVID restrictions. And this is partly at the prompting of Buckingham Palace.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's been very clear from the beginning that there has to be an understanding that while people will want to come together, they will want to remember Prince Philip, and they have been doing so here at Buckingham Palace throughout the afternoon. You can see behind me there's maybe a few hundred people there, and people have been coming, laying flowers and being moved on. Actually, there's quite a strong police presence. But there is an understanding that there has to be a limit, there has to be restrictions. And the first we really saw of that was when the announcement was placed on the railings of Buckingham Palace at 12:30, and normally it would have stayed there for hours, but they took it away within the hour because it would have obviously draw crowds. People wanted to draw, they wanted to read it, and understandably, because Prince Philip is so closely associated with Buckingham Palace, people want to come here, they associate the building with him. This is where they would like to leave tributes, as of course they're doing in Windsor Castle as well. Now, just in the last half hour there was some guidance that's come through, which I think just explains a little bit the thinking of how things are going to happen from now on, saying during the coronavirus pandemic, and in light of government advice and social distancing, there will be modified funeral and ceremonial arrangements for the Duke of Edinburgh, and they are being worked through at the moment by Her Majesty the Queen, and they will be confirmed shortly. It says, with the safety and well-being of the public in mind, members of the public are being asked not to gather in crowds, specifically not to gather at royal residences. And also during this time, the royal family asks that members of the public consider making a donation to charity instead of leaving floral tributes in memory to the Duke of Edinburgh. There will be an online book of condolence rather than a physical book of condolence in royal residences, which would have happened at any other time. But like I say, it's going to be online on the royal website. So, I mean, I think the message is people want to come together. They want to remember Prince Philip. Talking to people in the crowds, there was a real cross-section of ages, but Prince Philip meant something to each of them. So for some of them, it was because they were fans of the Crown, and so that's kind of brought him a whole new legions of fans and people interested in him. Another one, a young girl, told me that she came down because her grandmother had phoned her in tears when she heard the news, and she wanted her granddaughter to come and lay a tribute here at Buckingham Palace. So people will want to gather together. They will want to remember Prince Philip, but people are being asked not to gather in crowds, and that will be the theme over the coming days.
Sarah, thank you very much. That's our correspondent Sarah Campbell outside Buckingham Palace. Well, let's get the thoughts and reflections now of Sir Michael Palin, who's an advocate of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme and who met Prince Philip several times. Hello there, Sir Michael. Tell us, you met the Duke of Edinburgh several times. Tell us a little bit about the man, the person behind the public figure.
He was very good company. He knew how to relax people around him. I've been with him on many occasions where the people about to meet him are totally terrified of meeting a member of the royal family, and he disarmed them extremely well, either by being interested in what they were doing, but more particularly through a joke or a bit of humour. He always had a little twinkle in the eye whenever I met him, and he was touch of mischief. He'd asked me what I was doing. I remember once I said, I'm maybe going to Iran. He said, what are you going there for? And I said, well, it's either that or North Korea. And he laughed quite a long time at that. So he had a good sense of humour, which I think related to people and relaxed people. And he was genuinely interested in the people he met.
That's so interesting, because for many, he will have had a gruff, perhaps slightly prickly persona. Do you think that's incorrect?
No, I'm sure that's true. I mean, he was very forthright. He wouldn't let diplomacy get in the way of an honest conversation. He said what he felt, but it didn't mean that he was being insulting in any shape or form. It was his way of saying, look, let's get down to what's really important. He wasn't a great one for small talk. He was just interested in the short time he had with people, in what they were doing, whether it was environmental work, whether it was in sort of design. I met him once in connection with an organisation that produced was modern craft furniture and jewellery. So he was interested in lots of different things. And I think sometimes the gruff exterior meant, let's get to the bottom of this. He was very straight talking, but always, I think, in a very amenable and productive way, if I dare say so.
And did he like people standing up to him? I mean, if you disagreed with him, could you say so?
I never tried it, really.
You never tried it?
I think probably if you had a good case, absolutely. He wanted to hear what you had to say. And he met so many people in his long, long life and had so many interests quite outside the ceremonial part of his life. That, it's very hard to conceive just how much he had to take in and how much he had to give out. So I think he liked to debate. I mean, I didn't cross him at any point. I remember once saying to him, we were talking about Windsor Great Park and the shop there. And he said, oh, yes, we've got the shop doing very well. I said, it's very environmentally sound. He said, oh, absolutely not. He didn't like a cliche. He didn't like to be too pious or po-faced about anything, which I liked about him very much.
Although the environment was very important to him.
Yes, I mean, I think he was just winding me up a bit, because it looked like saying the right thing at the right moment. Of course it was, and he was very, very interested in what's happening, what David Attenborough was doing. There's a lovely story, actually, which David Attenborough told. David Attenborough once went to an island in the Pacific and was welcomed as a hero returning. He didn't know why it was that David Attenborough was given a garland and all that. It turned out they thought he was the Duke of Edinburgh. Sounded so similar that they thought the Duke of Edinburgh. They were there to really welcome.
And just take a moment, if you would, to tell us about the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme, because you're an advocate for it, and it was clearly a very central interest and passion of his.
Well, I mean, I don't know all the full details, but I know that it was to encourage initiative amongst younger people, to give them a sense of self-reliance, to learn to deal with any kind of situations, and make it entertaining and make it sort of something that would give them a basis for a better life later on, really. Just teaching self-reliance, I think, is what it's all about. And the one time when I was there at one of the awards ceremonies, there must have been 200 people there. And he talked to each one of them. And I think again, what you were saying earlier about standing up to him, he wanted to hear what they were saying as well. It wasn't just me, the Duke of Edinburgh, handing down my view. Come on, tell me what you think. And that was impressive.
Sir Michael Palin, thank you so much for that very vivid portrayal of the Duke of Edinburgh. Thank you. And if you are just joining us, we are broadcasting a special programme following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss." In public, when appearing with the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh always fulfilled the duties of royal consort, taking second place to Her Majesty. But as our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell now reports, behind closed doors, the Duke exercised immense influence on the life of the royal family and drove many of its key decisions and reforms.
A great roar from the crowd outside Buckingham Palace.
While the Queen took centre stage in public life, when it came to family matters, it was Prince Philip who was in charge. When Elizabeth came to the throne, Philip had to leave the Navy. It was unusual in the 1950s and 60s for the man of the household to give up his career to support his wife and children. But he had little choice but to fit his life around her unique position. And, as their home movies show, he did so with gusto.
First-hand accounts that I've been told by people who were there at the time of Prince Philip not just bathing the children, playing with the children, but reading to the children. He was a hands-on dad.
His was an unusual childhood, split up from his parents and his 4 sisters, one of whom was tragically killed.
The pleasures of family life are enjoyed by the baby's mother and father less frequently than by ordinary parents.
Royal duties involved frequent foreign travel, but as Philip's family grew, he was determined to do things differently.
I always aim to be home during the holidays anyway, so that I can see the children. I mean, we try and keep the children out of the public eye, largely so that they can grow up as normally as possible.
What's this for?
In 1969,
What's this for?
Philip allowed the TV cameras in for a behind-the-scenes documentary. This was the royal family, as never seen before or since, reportedly on the instruction of the Queen. Decisions such as schooling were his. Gordonston, the Scottish boarding school, had suited Philip as a youngster, and so that's where he chose to send his sons. While in later life, Prince Charles praised the school's ethos, his years there, far from home, were difficult.
Prince Charles has his memories, and that when it comes to Prince Philip's motives in what he was doing as a father, it was to try to toughen up his son, to correct what he perceived as weaknesses. I suppose, ultimately, perhaps to recreate the self-reliant, self-confident boy that Philip was turned into by the Gordonston system.
Father and son did come to share common ground, however. The Duke passed on his love of painting and a passion for the environment and conservation. His relationship with his other children was more straightforward. The bond with Princess Anne was clear. Alike in many ways, she was outspoken and she knew how to deal with her father's similarly frank manner. He shared a naval background with Prince Andrew, both having served in fields of conflict. And he may have been disappointed when Prince Edward chose to leave the Royal Marines, but over the years their relationship grew ever closer. It was to his youngest son that Philip entrusted perhaps his greatest legacy, the Duke of Edinburgh's award.
What's it like working with your father?
He doesn't, don't worry.
It's very easy.
He does his own thing.
And now the veil is thrown back and we can see the Princess of Wales.
There were difficult years when the marriages of 3 of his 4 children failed, the most public, the split of Charles and Diana. What emerged much later, to the surprise of some, was the extent to which he tried to help. During the breakup, he'd written to his daughter-in-law, and the tone of his letters and her replies revealed a softer, compassionate side to the Duke rarely seen in public. Dearest Pa, she wrote in 1992, that she was pleased to receive his letter, and particularly so to read that he was desperately anxious to help. He replied, if invited, he would always do his utmost to help, but was quite ready to concede that he had no talents as a marriage counsellor.
There was no doubt on her part that gruff and stern though Philip could often be, that his motives were of the best, and she appreciated that.
Into his 90s, public engagements became fewer, but family events, like Princess Charlotte's christening, remained a priority. In 2018, despite a recent hip replacement, he walked unaided into the chapel for his grandson Harry's wedding. 2 years later, isolating at Windsor, he was there for his granddaughter Beatrice.
A heavy program of official engagements prevents the Princess and the Duke from seeing their son as often as they wish. It is only on occasions like this that they can enjoy the happiness of parenthood.
It was a long life, where duty and family responsibility often came into conflict. The pandemic, as has been the case for so many families, deprived his loved ones of direct contact with him in his final months. His diminishing influence as the family patriarch coincided with a time of great public and private upset for the family. Perhaps the Duke's steadying influence and forthright manner were missed. His children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be united in mourning his loss.
Sarah Campbell there, looking at Prince Philip's life within his family. Well, other than the statement from Buckingham Palace, there has been no public statement by other members of the family until now, because the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's website has been transformed into a memorial page to the Duke of Edinburgh. You can see it there now. There's a short message on it which says, "In loving memory of His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, 1921 to 2021, and it adds in very small letters there, you may be able to make out, "Thank you for your service. You will be greatly missed." So that has been put up on the front page of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's website. Now, by his own admission, Prince Philip's years in the Royal Navy were immensely important in forming his character, and throughout his life he maintained the outlook and the bearing of a naval officer. As a midshipman, he was mentioned in dispatches for his bravery under fire. Later, when royal duties replaced his naval career, he worked to keep Britain's maritime history alive. We can look back now at the Duke's close relationship with the Royal Navy. Navy and life at sea were a huge part of the Duke of Edinburgh's career. It had been a British destroyer that had taken him, as a toddler, into exile from his native Greece. 2 of his sons were naval officers, Prince Charles and Prince Andrew, taking up where he'd left off after his wife became Queen. Prince Philip joined the Navy straight from school. As a cadet, he first met Princess Elizabeth in 1939 when she visited Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth with her parents. Active service came during World War II in 1940 as a midshipman on the old battleship HMS Ramillies. Years later, he reflected on life as a sailor.
You're exposed to the elements in a way which you're not ashore in any time, because you've got your feet on the earth, as it were, and you've got some sort of security, of shelter and so on. Whereas at sea, you're in a cockle shell in this enormous expanse of the ocean, so that tends to cut you down to size a bit.
In 1941, Philip joined HMS Valiant, operating in some danger in the Mediterranean. During the Battle of Cape Matapan, he earned a mention in dispatches for directing searchlights onto enemy cruisers.
We were hit by 2 bombs. The whole ship bent like that with the explosions, and actually bent sufficiently for some of the hatches down below to be jammed. So several people rang up and said, "Please, can you get a tin opener? We'd like to get out." You know.
Promotion followed and a posting to a destroyer on hazardous convoy duty in the North Sea, before he returned to the Mediterranean in support of the Allied invasion of Sicily. At the end of the war, he was in Tokyo Bay to witness the surrender of Japanese forces. After his marriage, he studied at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich and was posted to Malta, where Princess Elizabeth joined him as an officer's wife. It was clearly a happy time for them both. In 1950, Philip was given his first command, the frigate HMS Magpie. But his active naval career ended 2 years later when the Queen succeeded to the throne. He accepted this momentous change in his life and simply got on with the job. But his contemporaries always believed that he could have achieved high rank.
I remember Lord Mountbatten talking to me when I was First Sea Lord, and he said, of course, if Philip had stayed in the Navy, there would have been great competition between you. I don't think the competition would have been very strong, actually. He would have got it.
Do you think so?
Oh, yes.
Royal duties were now his first priority. But the Duke maintained his interest in Britain's maritime heritage. And on the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, he was quick to leave the royal podium to march alongside his old comrades. The importance of the Royal Navy to Prince Philip. Well, we've had tributes and memories from world leaders and former world leaders all these last few hours, and we've just received one from Donald Trump and from his wife Melania, who say they send their deepest and most profound condolences to the Queen. And they go on to say that Prince Philip defined British dignity and grace. He personified the quiet reserve, the stern fortitude and unbending integrity of the United Kingdom. And they reflect that as a young man, he served Britain honourably and courageously as a naval officer in the Second World War. Aboard battleships in the Mediterranean, he saw combat at sea. He then participated in the pivotal Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943. Like so many of his generation in Britain's darkest hour, he put his life on the line for God, country, and the values of freedom and self-government that forever unite America and the United Kingdom. And Mr. Trump and his wife Melania go on to say that for 7 decades, Prince Philip brought the same sense of duty and purpose to his role as consort and husband to the Queen. He was admired by his fellow citizens and respected by everyone around the world. His exceptional example of service, constancy and patriotism will be his greatest legacy. Well, we can speak now to the adventurer and broadcaster Bear Grylls, who is the UK's chief scout and supporter of the Prince's Trust and the Royal British Legion. Hello there, Bear. Thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News. I suppose it will be interesting to think about the organisations that you are involved in, that he oversaw, and the sort of values that those organisations exemplify, those of an active life, of self-reliance and of resilience.
Yeah, you're so right. Those words, active life and resilience and service, is at the heart of what he stood for, and so many of those organisations. I mean, I think of the Queen Scouts, and how the Queen's always been patron of that, but it's always been Prince Philip beside her. And I remember so well just a few years ago at the Queen Scout Awards at Windsor Castle, him sort of walking alongside the Queen and me, going up and down these rows of Queen Scouts, young people who had reached the pinnacle of scouting, and just how interested he always was in their lives and their aspirations. And, you look at the D of E Awards, the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, people forget that runs in something like 144 countries now. And that's real legacy stuff. And then you've got the Captain General of the Royal Marines. I mean, he was Captain General of that for 64 years, 201 days. And I remember so well that last solo engagement he did in 2017. It was with the Royal Marines at Buckingham Palace, and it was pouring a rain, and everyone was there with umbrellas, but he was just sort of out there without it, and Band of the Royal Marines playing, and sort of hairs on the back of your neck time of just realizing total service, and just his love of this country. And I spoke to a scout only earlier today, a scout leader, who said, sort of sums it up. He goes, they don't make him like that anymore.
It's so interesting because for many people, he will have appeared quite a daunting person. But everybody who has met him, who we've talked to today, has talked about how interested he has been in people, that he was a very engaged individual.
He was an ultimate people's person, wasn't he? And I think that speaks to his naval background. You've got to remember as well, he's one of the last surviving veterans from the Second World War. He truly spoke everyone's language, wherever you were in the world or in society. And I think that is part of what people loved about him, actually. It wasn't a kind of performance. You felt like it was a real person. And even the irreverent side of him was kind of, part of you couldn't love him for it.
For reasons of time, we have to leave it there. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing your reflections. That's the broadcaster Bear Grylls. One of Prince Philip's greatest contributions to public life was the award scheme that he established in 1956. As we heard there, the Duke of Edinburgh's award. At the time, the scheme was seen as a radical and pioneering scheme, and it encouraged young people to explore new challenges, to take risks and to show initiative. And as Elaine Dunkley now reports, the scheme has enriched the lives of millions of young people, even during the coronavirus pandemic.
The Duke of Edinburgh's award. Activities, expeditions and adventures. For millions of people, it has been part of growing up. It aims to give young people from all backgrounds a sense of achievement outside of the classroom through field trips and volunteering.
How many times do you think you got lost?
For these pupils at secondary school in the heart of Manchester, the experience has been life-changing.
Like when you go on Duke of Edinburgh, it's just a whole different environment. It's like green everywhere, like as far as you can see.
Even signing up for it was a bit out of my comfort zone because prior to it I was quite shy and reserved and didn't really talk to many people in my year.
I've been working for a charity shop in my community, and I think definitely it's been a very interesting. You get to meet lots of new people, get to talk to lots of interesting people, hear their story.
Had fun and made so many friends without, I don't know how I'd have gotten through my high school years, honestly. It's really, really good.
It began in 1956 and grew out of the Duke's own experiences at Gordonston. The award's ethos was rooted in the philosophy of the school's headmaster, Kurt Hahn, who felt that education should be about more than just academic achievement.
It was based on Hahn's theory that you shouldn't be a specialist in any one thing, and he felt that that you shouldn't concentrate entirely on academic education. His philosophy was that if you could get young people to succeed in any area of activity, that mere sensation of success would spread over into a lot of others.
When the scheme first started, it was considered quite revolutionary, but it also had its detractors.
I think a lot of organisations thought it was going to be a rival. The Scouts, the Guides, Outward Bound Trust, all kinds of people thought, oh dear, here comes another youth organisation to rival us. The cleverness was that it was a programme which was complementary and not competitive, so anyone could do it.
The The programme has moved with the times. It started as a boys-only group, and even when girls joined, there was a gender divide.
Can you tell me how you'll be able to get instructors and adjudicators to teach things like marriage and make-up and all the other new schemes you've mentioned in the pamphlet?
Oh, make-up we've got no problem. Marriage might be a bit more difficult.
From helping at food banks to vaccination centres, during the pandemic, many young people have volunteered through the scheme.
Are you here for the vaccine, madam? All right. I think the Duke of Edinburgh is fantastic to gain, especially independence. Everyone can do it. Everyone's helping the community, everyone's being active, everyone's learning a new skill. And I think the inclusion of the youth is fantastic.
OK, guys, ready to go?
Throughout the decades, the awards have been based on physical activity, skills, service and expedition. What you choose to do in each category is almost unlimited. Then there are 3 levels: gold, silver and bronze.
It's his vision and energy that created the organisation that enabled many, many young people to be able to access these development opportunities. And he was an absolute sort of stalwart champion for young people's sort of opportunities and development right the way through until he retired. While this is and it's an incredibly sort of sad moment to reflect on his passing, we are incredibly optimistic about the fact that we can build on his incredible legacy, and the award will still be going strong many, many years from now.
Its popularity and success has spread across the globe, with more than 140 countries taking part. The scheme that bears his name will perhaps be his greatest legacy, a testament to the ideas and outlook of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Elaine Dunkley reporting there. You are watching continuing coverage with reaction to the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss."